The scream of a horse in distress cut through the pre-dawn silence like a knife, jerking Thomas Crawford from his restless sleep, with his heart hammering against his ribs. He bolted upright in bed, threw off the thin blanket, and grabbed his trousers from the chair by the window. The sound came again, followed by a low, soothing voice he did not recognize. Thomas froze with one leg in his pants, listening hard. Someone was in his stable, and at this hour that could only mean trouble. He pulled on his boots without bothering with socks, snatched his rifle from above the doorframe, and moved quietly through the small ranch house. The floorboards creaked under his weight despite his caution. Outside, the Wyoming morning was still dark, though the eastern horizon showed the first blush of purple that promised sunrise within the hour. The October air bit at his bare chest, raising goosebumps across his shoulders as he crossed the yard toward the stable. His breath formed small clouds in front of his face. The stable door stood slightly ajar, and warm lamplight spilled through the gap. Thomas approached from the side, keeping his footsteps light in the dirt. He could hear that voice again, soft and feminine, speaking words he could not quite make out. His mare, Juniper, who had been acting strange for the past few weeks, nickered in response. Thomas eased closer to the door and peered through the crack. What he saw made him lower his rifle in surprise. A woman knelt in Juniper's stall, her hands moving expertly along the mare's swollen belly. She wore men's clothing that hung loose on her thin frame, and her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a braid that reached halfway down her back. The lamplight caught the angles of her face, all sharp cheekbones and hollow cheeks that spoke of missed meals. She could not have been more than 25 years old, maybe younger. Thomas pushed the door open wider, and the hinges squeaked. The woman's head snapped toward the sound, and her eyes went wide with fear. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the far wall of the stall. Juniper whinnied and stamped her feet. "Easy now," Thomas said, setting his rifle against the wall just inside the door to show he meant no immediate harm. "You want to tell me what you are doing in my stable at 4 in the morning?" The woman said nothing, just stared at him with those wide eyes. They were green, he noticed, the color of new grass in spring. Her hands trembled as she slowly got to her feet, and he saw she was barefoot despite the cold. "I am not going to hurt you," Thomas said more gently. He took a step forward and she flinched. He stopped. "But I would like some answers." "How long have you been here?" "Your mare is going to foal soon," the woman said finally. Her voice was hoarse as if she had not used it much lately. "Maybe 2 weeks. The baby is positioned wrong. I was trying to help." Thomas looked at Juniper, who did seem calmer than she had been in days. He had thought about sending for the veterinarian from Wallace, but the man charged a fortune and was often drunk. "You know horses. My father raised them. Before." She did not elaborate on what came before, and her eyes took on a distant look. "Before what?" Thomas asked. The woman wrapped her arms around herself and said nothing. She looked like she might bolt if he moved too quickly, like a wild animal trapped in a corner. Thomas changed tactics. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "Come on up to the house. I will make some breakfast and we can talk." When she did not move, he added, "Please, if you have been helping my horses, the least I can do is feed you proper." The woman glanced at the stable door, clearly calculating her chances of running. Thomas deliberately turned his back on her and walked out, leaving his rifle behind. It was a calculated risk, but something told him she was more scared than dangerous. He crossed the yard slowly, listening for footsteps behind him. For a long moment, he heard nothing. Then, soft as a whisper, came the pad of bare feet on dirt. Inside the house, Thomas lit the lamps and stoked the fire in the cast iron stove. The woman stood just inside the doorway, looking ready to flee at any second. He pulled out a chair from the small wooden table. "Sit," he said. "Please." She sat gingerly on the edge of the chair, her posture rigid. Thomas noticed the way her eyes darted around the room, cataloging exits and potential weapons. Whatever had happened to her, it had left her ready for danger at every turn. He busied himself with making breakfast, pulling eggs from the cold box and slicing thick pieces of bread from yesterday's loaf. The bacon sizzled in the pan, and he saw her nostrils flare at the smell. When had she last eaten a real meal? He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it as if to absorb its warmth, but did not drink. "Name is Thomas Crawford," he said, cracking eggs into the pan beside the bacon. "Though most folks call me Tom. I have had this ranch for about 3 years now. Nothing fancy, just me and the horses mostly. Do some cattle, but that is not really my heart's work." The woman said nothing, but he saw her shoulders relax slightly. "Came out to Wyoming in '75, he continued, keeping his tone conversational. "Worked on other people's ranches until I saved enough to buy this place. It is not much, but it is mine." He plated the food and set it in front of her, then took his own plate and sat across the table. "Your turn." She stared at the food like she did not quite believe it was real. Then, with jerky movements, she picked up the fork and began to eat. She tried to go slow, but he could tell she wanted to devour it. He pretended not to notice and focused on his own breakfast. "Sarah," she said finally, between bites. "Sarah Dalton." "Sarah," he repeated, liking the way it sounded. "That is a good name." "Now, Sarah Dalton, how long have you been sleeping in my stable?" Her hand froze halfway to her mouth. She set the fork down carefully. "You knew." "Not until about 10 minutes ago," Thomas admitted. "But it explains some things. Feed has been disappearing faster than it should. Horses have been calmer. Found some blankets rearranged in the tack room last week, though I figured it was just wind." He took a sip of coffee. "You have been here a while. 3 weeks, Sarah said quietly. "Almost 4. Where did you come from?" Her jaw tightened and he saw the walls go up again. "Does it matter?" "It might," Thomas said. "Are you running from the law?" "No." "Someone else then, a husband?" "I am not married." The way she said it suggested there was more to that story, but Thomas decided not to push. "Not yet." "Well, you cannot keep sleeping in the stable," he said. "It is October, going to get colder soon, and that stable is not meant for people in winter." Fear flashed across her face. "Are you sending me away?" The question surprised him. There was such naked desperation in it. "I am saying you can stay in the house. I have got a spare room, barely bigger than a closet, but it has got a bed and a window. Door has a lock on the inside," he added, seeing her hesitation. "Why would you do that?" Sarah asked suspiciously. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Thomas said honestly. "Except maybe you could keep helping with the horses if you know what you are doing. I could use the help, and you clearly need a place to stay. Seems like it would work out for both of us." She studied him for a long moment, those green eyes searching his face for signs of deception. He kept his expression open and honest. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Just until I figure out where I am going," she said. "Fair enough." Thomas stood and carried his empty plate to the wash basin. "Finish eating. Then I will show you the room and you can get some real sleep. We will talk more when you wake up." Sarah did not argue. She finished her breakfast in silence, then followed him to the small room off the main living area. It was indeed barely bigger than a closet, with space for a narrow bed, a small chest of drawers, and little else. But the bed had clean sheets, and the window looked out over the eastern pasture where the sunrise was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. Thomas nodded and closed the door, hearing the quiet snick of the lock engaging. He stood there for a moment, wondering what he had just gotten himself into. Then he shook his head and went to get properly dressed. The horses needed tending, and the ranch did not run itself. When he returned to the stable, he found his rifle right where he had left it. In Juniper's stall, he saw signs of Sarah's presence. The water bucket had been freshly filled, and someone had spread clean straw in the corner. He ran his hand along Juniper's neck, and the mare leaned into his touch. "What do you think, girl?" he murmured. "Is she going to be trouble?" Juniper snorted and shook her mane. Thomas took that as an answer of sorts and got to work. The sun was high in the sky when Sarah emerged from the house. Thomas was in the corral, working with a young gelding named Thunder who had a tendency to shy at shadows. He saw her standing on the porch, watching, and gave her a nod. She had washed her face and done something different with her hair, though she still wore the same oversized men's clothes. She walked over to the corral fence and leaned against it. "He is scared of something," she observed. "Everything," Thomas said, keeping his voice low and soothing as he moved closer to Thunder. "Previous owner did not treat him right, trying to show him not all people are bad." "Takes time," Sarah said, "that it does." Thomas managed to get close enough to touch Thunder's neck. The horse trembled but did not bolt progress. "You really know horses. My father bred them in Kansas," Sarah said. "Had a ranch outside of Dodge City. I grew up around them." "Had?" Thomas asked carefully. "He died 2 years ago. Fever took him." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "My mother went 5 years before that, bringing my baby brother into the world. Neither of them survived." "I am sorry." Sarah shrugged. "After my father died, his brother inherited everything. My uncle did not see any reason to keep me around. Said a woman had no business running a ranch. He sold everything and told me I should find a husband to take care of me." "But you did not want a husband," Thomas guessed. "I had one picked out for me," Sarah said bitterly. "Man named Robert Finch. He was 50 years old, mean as a snake, and owned a lot of land. My uncle thought it was a perfect match. I disagreed." Thomas let Thunder move away and turned to face Sarah properly. "What happened?" "I was supposed to marry him 3 months ago. Week before the wedding, I found out he had beaten his first wife so badly she lost the ability to walk. She died a year into their marriage. Folks said it was pneumonia, but her sister told me the truth." Sarah's hands tightened on the fence rail. "I told my uncle I would not marry Finch. He said I did not have a choice, so I left." "Where is your uncle now?" "Kansas, I assume. Maybe he is looking for me, maybe he is not. I have been moving since August, working where I could, sleeping where I could. Ran out of money in Montana, walked most of the way down here." Thomas tried to imagine walking from Montana to Wyoming with nothing. The journey alone would have been dangerous, not to mention everything else a woman traveling alone might face. "That is a long walk." "Better than marrying Robert Finch," Sarah said simply. They stood in silence for a moment. A hawk cried somewhere overhead and the wind rustled through the dry grass. Thomas made a decision. "The offer stands," he said. "You can stay here as long as you need. Help with the horses, earn your keep. I cannot pay much, but you will have a roof over your head and regular meals." "Why are you being kind to me?" Sarah asked. "You do not know me." "Maybe that is exactly why," Thomas said. "Because I do not know you yet, so I have not got any reason not to be kind. Besides, like I said, I could use the help, and you clearly know what you are doing with horses." Sarah searched his face again, and he met her gaze steadily. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded. "All right," she said. "Thank you." "Welcome to the Crawford Ranch," Thomas said with a small smile. "Such as it is." Over the next few days they fell into an easy routine. Thomas woke before dawn and started the coffee. Sarah was usually up soon after, moving quietly around the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. They ate together in companionable silence, then headed out to tend the horses. Thomas had 5 mares, including Juniper, 2 geldings, and a young stallion named Ranger that he was training to sell. Sarah took to them all immediately, and they to her. She had a gift with them, a natural understanding that came from years of experience and genuine love for the animals. Thomas found himself watching her when she thought he was not looking. The way she moved with quiet efficiency, never wasting motion. The way she hummed under her breath while brushing the horses, some tune he did not recognize. The rare smile that crossed her face when one of the horses nuzzled her shoulder. She was still too thin, but regular meals were beginning to fill out her hollow cheeks. On the 4th day, they rode out to check the fence line in the north pasture. Sarah rode one of the gentler mares, a dappled gray named Misty, and she sat the saddle like she was born to it. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, the sky an endless expanse of blue overhead. "How did you end up in Wyoming?" Sarah asked as they rode side by side. "Drifted," Thomas said. "Did not have much tying me anywhere after the war. You fought. 4 years. Tried to go home after, but home was gone. Parents died while I was away, farm got sold for taxes. Brother moved to California, lost touch." He shrugged. "Figured I might as well see the West everyone was talking about." "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. Thomas thought about that. "Sometimes. Gets lonely out here, but I cannot imagine living in a city all cramped up with people. This suits me better." They found a section of fence that needed mending and spent the next hour repairing it. Sarah worked without complaint, holding posts steady while Thomas hammered them into place. Her hands, he noticed, were calloused and strong despite her thin frame. As they mounted up to head back, Sarah said, "I know what it is like, being lonely." Thomas looked at her. She was staring out at the horizon, her expression distant. "Even before I left Kansas, I felt alone," she continued. "My father loved me, but after he died, I realized I did not have anyone else. No real friends. No one who would have stood up for me against my uncle. I could have disappeared and hardly anyone would have noticed." "I would notice," Thomas said before he could stop himself. "If you disappeared now, I mean." Sarah turned to look at him, surprise clear on her face. A faint blush colored her cheeks and she looked away quickly. "We should head back," she said. "Getting late." They rode in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Thomas found himself very aware of her presence beside him, the way the fading sunlight caught in her hair, the determined set of her shoulders. Something was shifting between them, subtle as the changing seasons but just as inevitable. That night, after supper, Sarah lingered at the table instead of immediately retreating to her room. Thomas was going over his accounts, such as they were, trying to figure out if he could afford to buy feed for winter or if he would need to sell one of the horses. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked, nodding at the ledger. "Not terrible," Thomas said. "Just tight. Always is this time of year. I will make it through winter, but there is not much extra." "I am costing you money," Sarah said. "The food." "You are earning it," Thomas countered. "I would have had to hire someone to help with the horses eventually anyway, especially with Juniper about to foal." As if summoned by her name, a sharp whinny came from the stable. Thomas and Sarah looked at each other and then bolted for the door. In the stable, they found Juniper pacing her stall, clearly distressed. Sarah was in the stall before Thomas had even reached it, her hands already moving to examine the mare. "It is time," she said. "The baby is coming. Now, I thought you said 2 weeks." "I said maybe 2 weeks. Babies come when they are ready." Sarah's voice was calm and focused. "I need clean towels and warm water. And more light." Thomas ran back to the house and grabbed everything she asked for, plus a few extra lamps. By the time he returned, Sarah had Juniper lying down and was speaking to her in that low, soothing voice he had heard that first morning. He set up the lamps around the stall and brought the water and towels. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Just be ready to help if I call for you," Sarah said, "and pray the baby turns." The next hours were tense. Thomas had seen horses foal before, but never one in distress like this. Sarah worked tirelessly, her hands gentle but sure as she helped guide the foal into position. Juniper labored and struggled, and Thomas found himself praying to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore. Finally, as midnight approached, the foal came. It slid into the world in a rush of fluid and blood, and for a terrible moment it lay still. Sarah grabbed one of the towels and began rubbing it vigorously, clearing its nose and mouth. Thomas held his breath. Then the foal gasped and began to breathe, and relief flooded through him so strongly his knees nearly buckled. "It is a girl," Sarah said, and she was smiling, really smiling for the first time since he had met her. "A beautiful girl." Juniper lifted her head and nickered, already reaching for her baby. Sarah moved back to give them space, and Thomas helped her to her feet. They were both covered in blood and birthing fluids, but neither of them cared. They stood together, watching the foal struggle to stand on wobbly legs. "You did it," Thomas said quietly. "You saved them both." "We did it," Sarah corrected. She turned to look at him, and in the lamplight her eyes were bright with tears. "Thank you for trusting me." Standing there in the stable, covered in the evidence of new life, something passed between them. Thomas felt it like a physical thing, a connection snapping into place. He wanted to say something, to name what he was feeling, but the words would not come. Instead, he just smiled at her, and she smiled back, and for that moment it was enough. They cleaned up in the yard, using the pump to wash the worst of the mess from their hands and arms. The water was freezing, but neither complained. Sarah was yawning by the time they finished, exhaustion clear on her face. "Go sleep," Thomas said. "I will stay with Juniper tonight, make sure everything is all right." "I can stay too," Sarah protested. "You have been up since dawn. I will wake you if anything changes." When she still looked reluctant, he added, "Please, I need you rested in case there are complications tomorrow." That logic convinced her. She nodded and headed to the house, moving slowly. Thomas watched her go, then returned to the stable. He pulled up a stool outside Juniper's stall and sat down to keep watch. The mare and her filly were both resting now, the baby curled up in the clean straw. Thomas found his thoughts drifting to Sarah. How had she become important to him so quickly? He had been alone for so long that he had gotten used to the solitude, even come to prefer it. But now, after just a few days, he could not imagine the ranch without her in it. The house felt less empty when she was there. The work went faster with her help, and when she smiled, really smiled like she had tonight, something in his chest loosened that he had not realized was tight. He was in trouble, Thomas realized. The kind of trouble that could not be fixed with hard work or careful planning. The kind of trouble that involved the heart. The next morning, Sarah was back in the stable before breakfast, checking on Juniper and the foal. Thomas woke from his doze on the stool to find her examining the baby with practiced hands. "She is perfect," Sarah announced. "Strong and healthy. She will be a beauty when she grows up." "Takes after her mother," Thomas said, then realized how that sounded. "The mare, I mean, Juniper. Obviously." Sarah gave him an amused look. "Obviously." They fell back into their routine over the following weeks, but everything felt different now. Thomas found himself looking for excuses to work near Sarah, to hear her voice or see her smile. He noticed small things about her. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the slight limp she tried to hide on her left side, the scars on her forearms that might have come from 100 different sources. Each detail felt precious, something to be treasured and remembered. Sarah seemed to be changing too. The fearful, hunted look gradually faded from her eyes. She laughed more, talked more. She started wearing one of the dresses Thomas had found in a trunk in the attic, something left by the family who had owned the ranch before him. It was faded and patched, but it fit her better than the oversized men's clothes, and the blue fabric brought out the color of her eyes. Winter started to set in. The first snow came in mid-November, just a dusting that melted by noon, but it was a warning of what was coming. Thomas and Sarah worked to prepare the ranch, stocking feed and firewood, checking the stable roof for leaks, bringing the cattle in closer to the buildings. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Sarah asked, "Have you ever thought about getting married?" The question caught Thomas off guard. He considered his answer carefully. "I did. Long time ago. There was a girl in Tennessee before the war. I thought maybe after I came back we would get married. But when I did come back, she was already married to someone else, had a baby on the way." He stared into the flames. "Did not much think about it after that. Figured marriage was not in the cards for me. You still think that?" Sarah asked quietly. Thomas looked at her. She was watching him with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Maybe I was wrong." Sarah bit her lip. A gesture he was coming to recognize meant she was gathering courage. "I did not think I would ever want to get married. After seeing what my uncle tried to force me into, after hearing about Robert Finch and what he did to his wife, I thought marriage was just another way for a man to own a woman." "I suppose it can be," Thomas said. "If the people are wrong for each other, or if one of them is cruel." "But it does not have to be that way," Sarah said. It was not quite a question. "No," Thomas agreed. "I do not think it does." They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. Thomas felt like they were standing on the edge of something, a precipice that would change everything. He wanted to step forward to say the words that were building in his chest, but fear held him back. What if he was reading this wrong? What if she did not feel the same way? She had been through so much already. He did not want to ruin the fragile peace she had found here by pushing for something she was not ready to give. Before he could decide what to do, Sarah stood abruptly. "I should go to bed. Early morning tomorrow." "Sarah," Thomas started, but she was already moving toward her room. "Good night, Thomas," she said, and closed the door behind her. Thomas sat by the dying fire for a long time, wondering if he had just made a terrible mistake. The next few days were awkward. Sarah was polite but distant, and Thomas did not know how to bridge the gap that had opened between them. They worked together as efficiently as ever, but the easy companionship was gone, replaced by uncomfortable silences and careful courtesy. It was Ranger who finally broke the tension. The young stallion had been acting up, refusing to let Thomas saddle him. After the third attempt ended with Ranger rearing and nearly trampling Thomas, Sarah stepped in. "Let me try," she said. Thomas stepped back, frustrated and a little embarrassed. Sarah approached Ranger with her hands held out, speaking in that low voice of hers. The stallion's ears flicked toward her, listening. She moved slowly, never threatening until she was close enough to touch his neck. Ranger trembled but did not move away. "What is wrong, boy?" Sarah murmured. "What has got you so upset?" She ran her hands along his back, and Ranger flinched when she reached his left shoulder. Sarah examined the area carefully and then looked at Thomas. "There is a sore here, under where the saddle sits. No wonder he does not want it on." Thomas moved closer and saw she was right. The skin was inflamed and tender, probably from where the saddle had rubbed wrong. "I did not see that." "You were not looking for it," Sarah said without judgment. "You thought he was just being difficult." They treated the sore and left Ranger unsaddled for the day. As they walked back to the house, Thomas said, "I am sorry." Sarah stopped and looked at him. "For what?" for the other night. I think I said something wrong or maybe did not say something I should have. Either way, I am sorry. I do not want things to be strange between us." "You did not do anything wrong," Sarah said softly. "I am the one who should apologize. You asked me a question and I ran away from it. That is not fair to you." "You do not owe me anything," Thomas said. "Not answers, not explanations. You have given me more help than I had any right to expect just by being here." "But I want to explain," Sarah said. "Can we talk? Really talk?" They went inside and sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in their cups as they finally said the things that needed to be said. "I am scared," Sarah admitted. "Every day I am here, I feel safer. I feel happy. And that terrifies me because I know it can all be taken away. My uncle could find me. Robert Finch could track me down, or you could just change your mind one day and tell me to leave." "I would never do that," Thomas said firmly. "You say that now, but what if I become inconvenient? What if you meet someone else, someone you want to marry? Where would that leave me?" Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. She stiffened but did not pull away. "Sarah, I do not know what the future holds. Maybe your uncle will find you, though I will be damned if I let him take you away. Maybe 100 other things could happen. But I can promise you this. As long as I have a say in it, you have a home here. Not because you are useful or convenient, but because I want you here." "Why?" Sarah whispered. "Because you matter to me," Thomas said simply. "Because when I wake up in the morning, I am glad knowing I will see you. Because when you smile, everything feels lighter. Because you are brave and kind and strong, and you deserve to have a place where you can be safe." Tears were sliding down Sarah's cheeks now. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "And that scares me more than anything." Thomas felt his heart expand in his chest. "I know I am falling in love with you," he said. "Have been since the night Juniper foaled, maybe before, and yes, it is scary. But Sarah, I think it might also be the best thing that has ever happened to me." "What if I am broken?" Sarah asked. "What if all the running and hiding and fear has damaged me too much?" "Then we will figure it out together," Thomas said. "You are not broken. You are surviving. That takes more strength than most people ever need." He squeezed her hand gently. "I am not asking you to marry me right now or make any promises. I am just asking you to stay. To let this thing between us grow and see where it goes. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Thomas stood and moved around the table, and she rose to meet him. He pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, burying her face against his chest. He held her while she cried, one hand stroking her back, and silently vowed that he would do everything in his power to keep her safe. When the tears finally stopped, Sarah pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I do want to stay," she said, "for as long as you will have me." "Then you are home," Thomas said and kissed her forehead gently. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the quiet kitchen while the winter wind rattled the windows. Outside, the first real snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the ranch in white. Inside, something new and precious was taking root, fragile as a seedling but growing stronger with each passing moment. December brought deep snow and bitter cold. Thomas and Sarah worked twice as hard to keep the animals fed and the paths clear. But the evenings were warm and cozy, spent by the fire talking about everything and nothing. Thomas told her about the war, things he had never spoken of to anyone. Sarah shared memories of her parents, of her life before everything fell apart. They learned each other slowly, carefully, building trust one conversation at a time. On Christmas Eve, Thomas presented Sarah with a gift wrapped in brown paper. She opened it to find a new dress, the fabric a deep green that matched her eyes. He had ordered it from the catalog after carefully guessing her measurements. "Thomas, you should not have," Sarah said, but her eyes were shining. "This must have cost a fortune." "You needed something nice," Thomas said, suddenly shy. "Besides, I wanted to see you in it." Sarah disappeared into her room and emerged a few minutes later wearing the dress. It fit perfectly, highlighting her figure in a way the old faded blue one did not. Thomas felt his breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said. Sarah blushed and smiled. "Thank you. For the dress and for everything else. This is the best Christmas I have had in years." "Mine too," Thomas said honestly. They spent the evening reading together from Thomas's small collection of books, Sarah's head resting on his shoulder as the fire burned low. It was peaceful and perfect, and Thomas found himself thinking about forever. The new year arrived with a blizzard that trapped them inside for 3 days. They passed the time playing cards, telling stories, and making plans for the ranch in the spring. Sarah wanted to start breeding horses more seriously, and Thomas found he liked the idea of building something together with her. On the 3rd day, when the snow finally stopped and they could venture outside again, they found one of the cattle had gotten stuck in a snowdrift. It took both of them working together to free the frightened animal and get her back to the barn. By the time they finished, they were both soaked through and shivering. Back in the house, Sarah started to shake uncontrollably as the cold caught up with her. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Thomas said, stoking the fire higher. He brought her dry clothes and blankets and then turned his back while she changed. When she was wrapped in blankets, he made hot tea and insisted she drink it all. "I am all right," Sarah said through chattering teeth. "Just cold. You could have died out there," Thomas said, fear making his voice sharp. "We both could have. But we did not," Sarah pointed out. "We worked together and we saved that cow." Thomas sat down heavily beside her. "I cannot lose you, Sarah. The thought of something happening to you, it tears me apart." Sarah set down her tea and took his face in her hands. "I am right here. I am fine. We are both fine." "I love you," Thomas said. The words came out rough and raw. "I should have said it sooner, should have told you every day." "I love you, Sarah Dalton. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubbornness. I love the way you talk to the horses and the way you hum when you think no one is listening. I love you, and I want you in my life for as long as you will stay." "I love you too," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face again. "God help me, I love you so much it terrifies me." Thomas kissed her then, soft and gentle, a promise and a question all at once. Sarah kissed him back, her hands tangling in his hair. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast and I know you have reasons to be scared, but I am asking anyway. Marry me, Sarah, be my wife, build a life with me here." "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in Wallace, the nearest town with a proper church. The ceremony was small, just the preacher, his wife as witness, and a shopkeeper who happened to be in the church at the time. Thomas wore his best suit, carefully brushed and pressed. Sarah wore the green dress and carried a small bunch of dried flowers Thomas had bought from a woman in town. The preacher asked if there was anyone who objected to the union. And for one terrible moment, Thomas held his breath, half expecting Sarah's uncle to burst through the door. But no one came. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Thomas kissed Sarah with all the love in his heart. They spent their wedding night in the town's small hotel, a luxury Thomas justified by the special occasion. The room was plain but clean, and Sarah stood by the window looking out at the snow-covered street while Thomas locked the door. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "No," Sarah said, turning to face him. "Just thinking about how much my life has changed. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in strangers' barns and stealing food. Now I am married to a good man who loves me. It does not seem real." "It is real," Thomas said, crossing to her. "I am real, you are real, and this life we are building together is real." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Sarah responded with equal passion. They came together in the darkness, learning each other's bodies with the same care and patience they had used to learn each other's hearts. It was tender and awkward and wonderful, and afterward they lay tangled together in the narrow hotel bed, whispering promises and plans until they fell asleep. They returned to the ranch the next day to find everything had survived their brief absence. Juniper's foal, now several months old and growing stronger every day, greeted them with cheerful whinnies. The other horses seemed to sense that something had changed, and they were more settled and content than Thomas had seen them in a long time. "They are happy for us," Sarah said, laughing as Misty pushed her nose against Sarah's shoulder, clearly looking for treats. "Or they are just glad we are back to feed them," Thomas said, but he was smiling too. The rest of winter passed in a blur of domestic contentment. Thomas had never been so happy. Every morning he woke up with Sarah beside him, her hair spread across the pillow like spilled gold. Every night they fell asleep in each other's arms, warm and safe despite the howling wind outside. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in patches to reveal brown grass and muddy ground. Thomas and Sarah threw themselves into ranch work with renewed energy. They repaired fences, cleaned the stable from top to bottom, and planned their breeding program for the horses. In April, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one morning over breakfast, the words coming out in a nervous rush. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, processing the information. Then he let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "A real baby." "That is generally what being pregnant means," Sarah teased, but her eyes were bright with happy tears. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked, suddenly worried. "I know we have not talked about children much." "I am terrified," Sarah admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I think I am ready for this." "With you, I am ready for anything." The pregnancy agreed with Sarah. As the months passed and her belly swelled, she seemed to glow with health and contentment. Thomas treated her like she was made of glass, much to her amusement and occasional frustration. "I am pregnant, not dying," she would say when he tried to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a plate. "Women have been doing this forever." But Thomas could not help worrying. He had lost so many people in his life, and the thought of losing Sarah or the baby was unbearable. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate enough, rested enough, did not work too hard. In September, Sarah went into labor on a crisp autumn afternoon. Thomas sent for the doctor in Wallace, but it quickly became clear the baby would not wait. Sarah handled it with the same calm competence she brought to everything else, talking Thomas through what needed to be done. "I am terrified," Thomas admitted as Sarah's contractions grew stronger. "So am I," Sarah said through gritted teeth, "but we are doing this together." Just like everything else. 6 hours later, their son was born. He came into the world screaming his outrage at the cold air, and Thomas fell in love instantly. Sarah held the baby against her chest, exhausted but radiant, and Thomas sat beside them with his arm around his wife and his hand resting gently on his son's tiny back. "Hello, little one," Sarah whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him William after Thomas's father and called him Will. He was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his mother's green eyes. Thomas had never known he could feel this much love for another human being. It terrified and amazed him in equal measure. The first year of Will's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and first smiles, of learning to be parents together. The ranch thrived under their joint care. They sold several horses at good prices and expanded their breeding program. Thomas built an addition onto the house, adding a proper bedroom for them and a nursery for Will. More years passed, each one building on the foundation of the last. Will grew from a baby into a rambunctious toddler who loved the horses almost as much as his mother did. When he was 3, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, called Ellie. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin, and she ruled the household from the moment she arrived. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and injured horses, money troubles and exhaustion. But through it all, Thomas and Sarah faced everything together. They had built something real and lasting, a home and a family that no one could take away. When Will was 8 and Ellie was 5, a stranger rode up to the ranch one summer afternoon. Thomas saw him coming from the corral and felt Sarah tense beside him. The man was older, probably in his 60s, with a hard face and expensive clothes. Thomas knew who he was before Sarah said his name. "That is my uncle," she said quietly. "Robert Dalton." Thomas moved protectively in front of her. "Stay with the children." "No," Sarah said firmly. "I am not hiding anymore." They walked out to meet Robert Dalton together. He dismounted slowly, looking around the ranch with an appraising eye before his gaze settled on Sarah. "Sarah," he said, "I have been looking for you for a long time." "I know," Sarah said. Her voice was steady. "Why are you here?" "I am dying," Robert said bluntly. "Consumption. Doctor says I have maybe 6 months. Before I go, I needed to make things right." Thomas felt Sarah's hand slip into his. He squeezed it reassuringly. "I was wrong," Robert continued, "about everything. About trying to force you to marry Finch, about selling your father's ranch, about not treating you like family. You were right to run." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "Robert Finch is dead, by the way, died 3 years ago, but that is not why I am here." He held out the envelope to Sarah. She took it slowly, her eyes never leaving her uncle's face. "That is a deed," Robert said, "to your father's ranch. I bought it back, piece by piece over the years. Took me a long time, but I got it all. It is yours now. I have already signed it over to you, legal and proper." Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands and stared at the document inside. "I do not understand." "I am trying to apologize," Robert said roughly. "I know it does not make up for what I did. Nothing could. But your father's ranch should have been yours from the start. Now it is. You can do whatever you want with it." There was a long silence. Thomas watched Sarah's face, seeing the war of emotions there. Finally, she said, "Thank you, but I do not need it. I have a home here with my husband and children. Maybe you should give the ranch to someone who needs it." "It is yours to do with as you please," Robert said. "Sell it, give it away, let it sit empty. I do not care, I just needed you to have it." He looked at Thomas for the first time. "You have taken good care of her." "She takes care of herself," Thomas said, "and all of us." Robert nodded slowly. "I can see that. She looks happy. Your father would have been proud," he said to Sarah. "I should have told you that before. He would have been proud of the woman you became and proud of the life you built." Tears were running down Sarah's cheeks. "Goodbye, Uncle Robert." "Goodbye, Sarah." He mounted his horse slowly, his movements betraying his illness. "For what it is worth, I am sorry. For all of it." They watched him ride away until he disappeared over the horizon. Sarah turned into Thomas's arms and let herself cry. Will and Ellie came running from the house, and Thomas and Sarah gathered them close, a family united and unbreakable. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Thomas talked about what to do with the ranch in Kansas. In the end, they decided to sell it and use the money to expand their own ranch and to set aside something for Will and Ellie's futures. It felt like closing a chapter, letting go of the past to fully embrace the present. More years passed. The children grew. Will showed his father's patience and his mother's way with horses. Ellie was wild and fearless, always getting into something. The ranch prospered. Thomas and Sarah's reputation for breeding quality horses spread, and they had more business than they could handle. On their 10th anniversary, Thomas took Sarah to the same spot where he had repaired the fence all those years ago, the day she had told him she was lonely. It was a beautiful spring day, the grass green and new, wildflowers dotting the landscape in splashes of purple and gold. "I have been thinking," Thomas said, holding both of Sarah's hands in his, "about how lucky I am. 10 years ago I was alone. I had a ranch and horses, but I did not have a life, not really. Then you showed up, this brave, scared woman sleeping in my stable, and everything changed." "You changed my life too," Sarah said softly. "You saved me." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You saved yourself. You ran away from a terrible situation. You survived on your own for months. You had the courage to trust me to stay, to build something new. I just gave you a safe place to land. You did the rest." Sarah smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. "We saved each other then. How about that?" "I can live with that," Thomas said and kissed her. They stood there on the hillside, looking down at the ranch they had built together. The house was bigger now, the stable expanded, more corrals added. Will was in the north pasture with 3 horses, practicing the training techniques Sarah had taught him. Ellie was probably in the house with the new puppy they had acquired last month, despite Thomas's protests that they did not need a dog. It was a good life, Thomas reflected. Not perfect, not easy, but good. Real. Built on love and trust and hard work. Built on the foundation of that first morning when he had found a woman tending his horses, a woman who had been sleeping in his stable for weeks. A woman who had become his wife, his partner, his everything. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked. "How it all started," Thomas said. "And how glad I am that Juniper got sick that night and woke me up." "Me too," Sarah said. "Although I was terrified when you first found me, I know, you looked like you were going to bolt." "I almost did," Sarah leaned against him. "Best decision I ever made staying." "Best decision I ever made too," Thomas said. "Asking you to." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The puppy came running to meet them, followed by Ellie, who was covered in dirt and laughing. Will rode up from the pasture, sitting his horse like he was born to it. Inside the house, dinner was waiting, and after that, the evening chores and bedtime stories and all the small rituals that made up their life. It was not the life either of them had imagined for themselves all those years ago. It was better. It was real and messy and full of love, built on a foundation of trust that had started with a simple act of kindness on a cold October morning. That night, as Thomas and Sarah lay in bed with the window open to let in the cool spring air, Sarah said, "Do you ever think about what might have happened if things had gone differently? If you had sent me away that first morning, or if I had run?" "Sometimes," Thomas admitted, "but not often. I try to focus on what is, not what might have been." "What is pretty good," Sarah said. "It is better than good," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," Sarah protested, but she was smiling. "Perfect for me," Thomas insisted. "You and the children and this life we have built. It is everything I never knew I wanted." "I love you," Sarah said, the words as true and strong as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Thomas replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, comfortable and content. Outside, the Wyoming night was alive with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. The horses moved quietly in the stable, and somewhere an owl hooted. The ranch was at peace. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Will grew into a fine young man, strong and capable, with his mother's gift for horses and his father's steady temperament. He met a young woman named Mary in Wallace, the daughter of the town's schoolteacher, and brought her home to meet his parents. Sarah and Thomas liked her immediately, and when Will announced his engagement, the whole family celebrated. Ellie grew up wild and free, learning to ride almost before she could walk properly. She had no interest in dresses or traditional ladylike pursuits, much to the horror of some of the more conventional women in Wallace. But Sarah defended her daughter's right to be whoever she wanted to be, remembering her own struggles against the expectations of others. Ellie dreamed of traveling, of seeing the world beyond Wyoming, and Thomas and Sarah encouraged her dreams while teaching her the practical skills she would need to survive. When Will married Mary, they built a small house on the edge of the ranch property. Will worked alongside his father, and it was clear he would inherit the ranch someday. Mary fit into the family perfectly, helping Sarah with the household work and proving to have a good head for business. Within a year, she gave Sarah and Thomas their first grandchild, a boy they named Henry. Thomas held his grandson for the first time with tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this," he told Sarah. "A family this big, this much love." "You deserve it," Sarah said, watching her husband with their grandchild. "You deserve all of it." When Ellie turned 18, she announced she wanted to travel east to visit family friends in Philadelphia. It was a journey that would take weeks and cost money they could spare but would miss. Thomas wanted to say no, wanted to keep his daughter safe at home. But Sarah reminded him that they had to let Ellie make her own choices, just as Sarah's father had trusted her to run his ranch when she was young. "She needs to go," Sarah said. "She needs to see the world and figure out who she is. We cannot keep her here out of fear." So they let Ellie go, though Thomas worried every day she was gone. She was away for 6 months, and when she returned, she was different, more settled, more sure of herself. She had decided what she wanted: to start a business breeding and training horses specifically for women riders, something practically unheard of at the time. Thomas and Sarah gave her a section of the ranch to start her business, and Ellie threw herself into the work with characteristic determination. Within 2 years, she had built a solid reputation, and women from all over Wyoming and the surrounding territories were coming to her for horses and riding lessons. She had found her place and her purpose. More grandchildren came. Will and Mary had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy. Ellie eventually married a quiet man named Joseph, who supported her business dreams and loved her fierce independence. They had twin daughters who were every bit as spirited as their mother. Thomas and Sarah grew older together, their hair going gray, their bodies moving a little slower each year. But their love remained as strong as ever, deepened and enriched by decades of partnership. They still worked the ranch together, though they relied more and more on Will and Ellie's help. They still sat together by the fire on winter evenings, still held hands when they walked across their land, still kissed each other good night before sleep. On the day of their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. A huge meal was prepared, and afterward, everyone gathered in the yard as the sun set. Will stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, "the strongest, bravest people I know. They built this ranch from almost nothing. They built a family. They built a life that is an example to all of us. We are all here because they had the courage to choose love when it would have been easier to stay alone." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Thomas looked at Sarah, and she looked back at him. And in that moment, they were 28 and 23 again, standing in a stable, connected by something neither of them fully understood yet but both of them trusted. Speech, someone called, and the call was taken up by others. Speech. Thomas stood slowly, Sarah's hand still in his. "I am not much for speeches," he said, "but I want to say something to Sarah, in front of all of you who are the proof of our love." He turned to face his wife fully. 25 years ago, I found you in my stable. You had been sleeping there for weeks, and I had not even known. You were scared and alone, and you had every reason not to trust me, but you took a chance. You stayed. You let me into your heart, even though it was terrifying. Tears were running down Sarah's face, and Thomas found his own eyes were wet too. "You have given me everything," he continued. "A family, a home, a purpose. You have made me better than I ever could have been alone. Every single day of these 25 years has been a gift, even the hard days, because I got to face them with you." He squeezed her hand. "I love you, Sarah Crawford. I will love you until the day I die and beyond if there is anything beyond." "I love you too," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me safety when I felt hunted. You gave me love when I did not think I deserved it. You have been my partner, my friend, my everything. These 25 years have been the happiest of my life." They kissed, while their family applauded and cheered. The grandchildren made exaggerated gagging noises that made everyone laugh. As the celebration continued around them, Thomas and Sarah held each other close, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed or to their own homes, Thomas and Sarah walked out to the stable one last time. The horses greeted them with soft, nickering sounds. Juniper was gone now, passed peacefully several years earlier, but her daughter remained, and her daughter's daughters, a living legacy. "You remember the first night?" Sarah asked, leaning against the stable door. "Every detail," Thomas said. "You were so scared, I thought you might run away before morning." "I almost did," Sarah admitted. "I had my bag packed and everything. But then you made me breakfast and offered me a place to stay, and something in me just knew I could trust you." "Best night of my life," Thomas said. "The night I found you." "The night you saved me," Sarah corrected. "The night we found each other," Thomas said. "How about that?" Sarah smiled and kissed him gently. "Yes, that is exactly right. The night we found each other." They walked back to the house together, moving a little more slowly than they once did, but still in step with each other, still connected by that unbreakable bond forged so many years ago. Inside, the house was quiet. The fire had burned down to embers. They banked it for the night and went to their bedroom, the same room they had shared for all these years. As they lay down together, Thomas pulled Sarah close against his side, her head resting on his shoulder in the position they had perfected over decades of sleeping together. "Thank you," Sarah whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Thomas asked. "For everything. For seeing me that first morning and choosing kindness instead of anger. For giving me a home, for loving me, for all of it." "Thank you for staying," Thomas replied. "For trusting me. For building this life with me. For loving me back." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two souls who had found their way home. Outside, the Wyoming wind blew across the land they had tended together for so long. The horses slept peacefully in the stable. The ranch stood solid and strong, built on a foundation of love and hard work and commitment. It was not a perfect life or a perfect love story. There had been struggles and hardships, moments of doubt and fear. But they had faced everything together, and that had made all the difference. From a chance encounter in a stable to a lifetime of partnership, they had built something rare and precious. As Thomas drifted into sleep, He thought about that scared woman he had found all those years ago, sleeping in his stable because she had nowhere else to go. He thought about how close they had come to never meeting, to never having this life. If he had not woken up that morning, if she had run before he found her, if either of them had been too afraid to take a chance on the other. But they had not been too afraid. They had been brave enough to trust, to hope, to love. And that bravery had given them everything. The last thing Thomas thought before sleep claimed him was that he would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every single moment, every challenge, every joy. Because all of it had led him here, to this bed, with this woman in his arms, in this house full of love, on this land they had made their own. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the Wyoming plains, they would wake up together and face another day the way they had faced all the others. Together, hand in hand, heart to heart, building their life one moment at a time. The end.